Have you ever held something so perfect in your hands, you were afraid to breathe? Afraid that the slightest exhale would shatter it into a million pieces? For Lena, that fragile, beautiful thing was her life. From the outside, it was a masterpiece. A painting of success, love, and luxury. A 5-bedroom house that echoed with the laughter of her 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. A wardrobe filled with silk and cashmere. A husband, Mark, whose smile could once light up the darkest room. But a painting is just a surface. And beneath the surface, cracks can form. Tiny, hairline fractures you don't see until it's too late. Lena's day started like any other. The soft California sun streamed through the panoramic windows of their modern, minimalist home. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, a beautiful, well-dressed ghost. Her purpose, her entire world, was to maintain this perfection. To make sure Mark's shirts were pressed, that Chloe's lunch was organic and artfully arranged, that the house was a showroom, a testament to his success as a rising tech entrepreneur. She had met Mark at a gallery opening 10 years ago. He was all sharp edges and ambition, a storm of energy. She was an artist, her soul full of color and dreams. He said her passion grounded him. She said his drive inspired her. They were fire and earth. They built a life. But slowly, the earth around Lena's fire began to cool. Her canvases gathered dust in the spare room, now a storage space for Mark's golf clubs and old files. Her opinions became suggestions, then whispers, then silence. Her world shrank to the dimensions of this beautiful, silent house. She was the curator of their happiness, but she was no longer a participant in it. That evening, Mark was late. Again. Lena sat at the long, marble dining table, pushing a piece of salmon around her plate. Chloe chatted about school, a science project on butterflies. "Mommy, did you know a caterpillar has to completely break down before it becomes a butterfly? It's like it disappears, and something new is born." Lena smiled, a tight, practiced movement of her lips. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." The front door clicked open. Mark's footsteps, confident and heavy, echoed in the hallway. He walked in, his phone pressed to his ear, a laugh on his lips that wasn't for them. He was wearing a new cologne. Something sharp, unfamiliar. "Gotta go, babe. I'll see you tomorrow," he said into the phone, his voice dropping to a soft, intimate tone Lena hadn't heard in years. He hung up and looked at them, his smile shifting, becoming the public one, the one he used for business associates. "Sorry, team dinner. The new project is a killer." Lena's blood ran cold. "Babe." The word hung in the air, a poisonous little cloud. She said nothing. She just watched him. She saw the way he avoided her eyes, the new energy in his posture. The cracks weren't just hairline anymore. She could feel the whole foundation groaning. Later, as he slept, his back to her, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Team dinner?" She remembered a text from his colleague's wife last week, a casual mention of the project wrapping up early. The lie was so effortless. So clean. This was the beginning of the end. But Lena didn't know it yet. All she knew was a deep, primal fear. The fear of the caterpillar, dissolving in the dark. The question wasn't if her world was going to shatter. It was when. And what would be left of her when the breaking was done? The human heart is a remarkable instrument. It can sense a shift in the atmosphere long before the storm hits. For Lena, the next few weeks were a slow-motion avalanche of tiny betrayals. The new cologne became a permanent fixture. Late nights became the norm. His phone, which once lay casually on the coffee table, was now a guarded secret, always face down, always with him, even to the bathroom. He started criticizing her. Small things. "This coffee is a bit bitter, Lena. Did you really let Chloe watch that much TV?" The comments were like paper cuts, shallow but stinging, 1,000 little wounds designed to make her feel small. Then came the night of the company's annual gala. This was their night. The one night a year Lena felt like a partner, not just a prop. She bought a new dress, a deep emerald green that made her eyes sparkle. She spent hours getting ready, a flicker of her old self returning. When she walked into the living room, Mark was on the phone again. He turned, and for a split second, she saw it. Not admiration. Not pride. Annoyance. You look expensive, he said, hanging up abruptly. The car ride was silent. At the gala, he was a different man. Charming, loud, the life of the party. But he never held her hand. He never introduced her to the new, young investors he was schmoozing. He left her standing by the champagne fountain while he whispered in the ear of a sleek, sharp-faced woman from the marketing department, Isabella. Lena watched them. She saw the way Isabella laughed, throwing her head back, her hand resting on Mark's arm for a second too long. It was like watching a play where she'd forgotten her lines. She was an outsider in her own life. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. Chloe was at a friend's house. The house was oppressively quiet. Mark came home early, for once. He looked resolved. Like a man about to perform a difficult, but necessary, task. Lena, we need to talk. Those 4 words. The universal herald of doom. She felt her knees go weak. She sat on the white sofa, her hands trembling in her lap. He didn't sit. He stood over her, a king delivering a decree. This isn't working anymore, he began, his voice cold, clinical. We've grown apart. You're not the woman I married. You're just here. Lena felt the air leave her lungs. What are you saying, Mark? I'm saying I want a divorce. The words were flat, final. I've fallen in love with someone else. Isabella. She challenges me. She understands my world. Isabella. The name was a bullet. The marketing woman. The one with the sharp laugh and the sharper eyes. Lena's world didn't just crack. It exploded. The beautiful painting of her life was ripped to shreds in an instant. The house, the cars, the money, it was all a lie. A stage set for a play that had ended without her knowing. What about Chloe? She whispered, her voice breaking. We'll figure it out, he said, already pulling a suitcase from the closet. My lawyer will be in touch. I've already moved my essential files. I'll be staying at a hotel. He packed with a terrifying efficiency. Clothes, passports, a few expensive watches. He was an evacuation, not a departure. He had planned this. Every detail. At the door, he paused. He didn't look back at her, crumpled on the sofa, tears streaming silently down her face. He looked at the house, his house. It's better this way, Lena. Clean. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut. The sound was softer than a gunshot, but it had the same effect. Lena was alone. In the gilded cage he had built for her, the door was now open, but she had nowhere to fly. She was broken, betrayed, and utterly, completely destroyed. The caterpillar had dissolved. Now, in the dark, she had to decide, would she remain a puddle, or would she find the strength to grow wings? The days that followed were a blur of grey. Lena moved through the house like a phantom, each room a museum of her failed life. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. The silence was a physical presence, suffocating her. Her phone was a weapon he used, his lawyer's calls delivering cold, hard facts. The prenup she'd signed when she was young and in love was ironclad. She would get the house, but it was mortgaged to the hilt. She would get a small alimony, enough to survive, not to live. And Chloe, shared custody. The thought of her daughter being paraded in front of Isabella, calling that woman Daddy's friend, was a fresh agony every time she thought of it. She was drowning. And the worst part was the lie he was spinning. Through mutual friends, she heard the narrative Mark was crafting. That their marriage had been empty for years. That Lena was fragile, unable to handle his success. That he and Isabella had found a once-in-a-lifetime connection. He was painting her as the problem, the unstable ex-wife, while he and his new partner were the brilliant power couple. The anger came slowly. It started as a tiny, hot ember in the pit of her stomach, cutting through the cold numbness of her grief. It was the day she took Chloe for her first weekend with Mark. He pulled up in a new sports car. Isabella was in the passenger seat, wearing a triumphant little smile. Ready for our adventure, kiddo? Mark said to Chloe, completely ignoring Lena. As they drove away, Chloe's small, confused face looking back from the window, the ember burst into flame. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her daughter. This was about the truth. She went back into the empty, silent house. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was focusing. She walked past the dusty spare room, the room that had once been her studio. She stopped. Her hand rested on the doorknob. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of memories and neglect. In the corner, covered by a sheet, were her old canvases. She pulled the sheet away. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. There they were. Bold, vibrant, chaotic splashes of color. Paintings full of life and passion. The woman who had painted these was a stranger to her now. And then she saw it. Leaning against the wall, half finished, was a portrait she had started of Mark years ago. It was from the beginning, when his ambition was charming, not corrosive. She looked at the confident eyes, the arrogant set of his jaw. She had captured the essence of him, even then. A plan began to form. Not a plan of screaming or begging. Not a messy, emotional revenge. Mark lived in a world of data, of image, of cold, hard facts. He had destroyed her emotionally. To hurt him, she would have to speak his language. She would have to destroy him in his own world. The ember of anger was now a steady fire. Lena picked up a charcoal pencil from a dusty jar. She looked at the blank wall of the studio. And she began to sketch. Not a face. Not a person. It was a flowchart. A web. At the center, she wrote his name. Mark. She was no longer the curator. She was the architect. And she was about to design his ruin. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say. But for Lena, it wasn't about temperature. It was about precision. It was about surgery. She would not come at him with a sledgehammer. She would use a scalpel. She would find the single thread in the tapestry of his life that, when pulled, would make the whole thing unravel. Her first step was understanding her enemy. Mark's kingdom was built on two pillars, his reputation as a visionary tech CEO, and his relationship with Isabella, which was the new jewel in his public crown. To break him, she had to tarnish the vision and shatter the jewel. But how does a stay-at-home mom with no recent job experience take on a tech titan? She started with the one thing she still had, time. And a mind that had been dormant for too long. Chloe was at school, the house was empty, and Lena had hours to dedicate to her new project. She turned the spare room back into a war room. The canvases were stored away. The walls were now covered in whiteboards and notes. It looked like the headquarters of a secret intelligence agency. She began her research. She knew Mark. She knew his arrogance was his greatest weakness. He was careless. He thought he was too smart to get caught. She logged into old, shared cloud accounts he'd forgotten to remove her from. She found old tax returns, business plans, investor pitch decks. She studied the tech industry, learning the jargon, the key players, the vulnerabilities. And then, she found it. The thread. It was in an old email chain, buried in a folder of scanned documents. It was between Mark and a silent partner from his early days, a man named Arthur Finch. The language was vague, but the numbers didn't add up. It talked about reallocating initial investor funds and creative accounting for the prototype phase. It was dated just before he secured his first major round of venture capital. It was a ghost. A whisper of something that smelled a lot like fraud. This was her scalpel. But a scalpel is useless without a steady hand. She needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. And she needed to understand the new woman in his life. Isabella. Lena created a fake LinkedIn profile. Sarah Jones, tech journalist. She used a photo of a college friend who had given permission. She sent a connection request to Isabella, praising a recent marketing campaign she'd led. Isabella, hungry for recognition, accepted immediately. Lena, as Sarah, began a gentle, flattering correspondence. She asked insightful questions about the company's direction, about Mark's inspirational leadership. Isabella, thrilled to be talking to a journalist, was boastful. She dropped names. She hinted at big, disruptive projects on the horizon. She was, as Lena had suspected, all surface and no substance, a climber who loved the spotlight. Lena now had 2 targets in her sights. And she was learning that the perfect payback wasn't just about hurting Mark. It was about exposing the truth. The truth about his business. The truth about his relationship. She would hold up a mirror to his life and force the world to see the cracks he had so carefully painted over. The broken wife was gone. In her place was a strategist, a hunter. And her hunt had just begun. The digital world is full of ghosts. Passwords we've forgotten, accounts we never closed, digital footprints we assume have faded away. Lena became a ghost in Mark's machine. She knew he was too arrogant to change all his passwords. He used variations of the same ones, a habit he'd had for years. One of them was the name of his first dog, combined with his old college graduation year. She tried it on an old project management portal for his company, Omnitech. The login spun for a second, and then she was in. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't a hacker, but she was his wife. She knew him. She navigated through the files, her eyes scanning for anything related to Arthur Finch or the early funding rounds. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But then she found a folder, hidden deep within a server labeled Archives Obsolete. It was named Project Phoenix. Inside were spreadsheets. Dozens of them. At first glance, they looked like normal business expenses. But Lena had been studying. She cross-referenced the dates with the emails she had found. She saw payments to a shell company she recognized from the old emails, a company named Apex Holdings, which was owned by Arthur Finch. The money was supposed to be for software licensing. But the amounts were huge, and the licensing was for technology that didn't exist at the time. It was a loop. Investor money went to Omnitech. Omnitech paid Apex Holdings for a fake service. The money circled back to Mark and Arthur, disguised as legitimate seed capital to attract bigger investors. It was fraud. Plain and simple. The foundation of his entire empire was built on a lie. This was the bomb. But setting it off now would be messy. It would destroy the company, yes, but it would also hurt the innocent employees. And Mark, the master of spin, might find a way to blame it on Arthur Finch and walk away, wounded but not destroyed. No, she needed more. She needed to make it personal. She needed to tie this bomb directly to him and his new, perfect life. She turned her attention back to Isabella. Through her Sarah Jones persona, she arranged a casual coffee meeting. She needed to see the woman in person, to look into her eyes. They met at a trendy cafe near Omnitech's offices. Isabella was every bit as polished and sharp as Lena remembered. She talked incessantly about Mark, about their synergy, about how she was his muse. He's so misunderstood, Isabella said, sipping her latte. People see the ambition, but I see the artist. He's building a legacy. Lena, as Sarah, nodded sympathetically. It must be amazing to be part of that. He seems so dedicated to you. Isabella preened. Oh, he is. He tells me everything. We have no secrets. She leaned in conspiratorially. He even told me about the shaky start with his first investor, Arthur. What a nightmare that was. Mark had to clean up all his messes. Lena's blood ran cold. He told her. He was so blinded by infatuation, he had shared his secrets. Isabella knew. She knew about the fraud, and she didn't care. She was a willing accomplice in the fantasy. In that moment, Lena's plan crystallized. She wouldn't just expose Mark's crime. She would use Isabella to do it. She would make his greatest trophy the very weapon that would destroy him. The perfect payback was taking shape. It was ruthless. It was elegant. And it was going to change everything. A master plan is only as good as its execution. Lena now had the components, the proof of fraud, and the knowledge that Isabella was aware of it. Her next move was to weave these threads into an inescapable web. She needed to create a situation where Mark's own actions, and Isabella's greed, would lead them right into a trap. She continued her correspondence with Isabella as Sarah the journalist, stoking her ego. You know, Isabella, you're the real story here. The woman behind the man. I'm pitching my editor on a profile piece, the new power couple reshaping Silicon Valley. What do you think? Isabella was ecstatic. This was everything she wanted. She began feeding Sarah more and more information, little boasts about her influence over company strategy, about how she was helping Mark streamline his past to present a cleaner narrative to future investors. Meanwhile, Lena, using an encrypted anonymous email service, made contact with Arthur Finch. Posing as a concerned Omnitech shareholder, she gently prodded him about the early financials of Project Phoenix. She didn't accuse him. She simply asked questions, hinting that a financial audit was imminent and that Mark was preparing to place all the blame on him to save his own skin. Arthur Finch, a nervous man by nature, panicked. He started sending frantic emails to Mark, which Lena could see copies of through her backdoor access. "We need to talk. Someone is asking about Phoenix. Mark, this is getting dangerous." Mark's replies were arrogant and dismissive. "Relax, Arthur. It's ancient history. No one can prove anything. I have it under control." But Lena could see the cracks spreading. Mark was getting paranoid. He and Isabella began arguing, their tensions visible even through their carefully curated social media posts. The pressure was building. The final piece of the web was the bait. Lena, as Sarah, told Isabella that her editor had greenlit the profile piece. But there was a condition. "My editor is a stickler for financial transparency," she wrote. "He wants to see a clean bill of health from the very beginning. He's worried about any skeletons in the closet, especially with the IPO rumors. Do you think you and Mark could provide some documentation about those early funding rounds? Just to put the story on solid ground." It was a brilliant, cruel trap. If they provided the documents, they would be handing over the evidence of their fraud to a journalist. If they refused, the glamorous profile piece, the thing Isabella wanted most, would vanish. Lena waited. She sat in her war room, watching her inbox. She had given them a choice. A choice between their vanity and their safety. And she knew, with absolute certainty, which one they would pick. The web was woven. All that was left was for the flies to walk into it. The human ego is a fascinating, and often self-destructive, thing. Mark and Isabella, drunk on their own success and infatuated with their public image, took the bait. Isabella, desperate for the spotlight, convinced Mark that cooperating was the smart move. "It's just due diligence, Mark," Lena could imagine her saying. "We show them we have nothing to hide. It makes us look stronger. We can spin it." So, they compiled a package. A carefully curated, sanitized set of documents meant to illustrate the challenging but honest early days of Omnitech. But in their haste and arrogance, they made a fatal mistake. Included in the packet, almost as an afterthought, was a single spreadsheet from the Project Phoenix folder. It was the master list of payments to Apex Holdings. They had meant to send a different, cleaner version, but in their rush, they sent the original. The one with the damning, unedited numbers. When Lena saw the file appear in her Sarah Jones inbox, with a cheerful email from Isabella saying "Here's everything you need," she actually felt a chill. It was done. They had handed her the murder weapon, wrapped in a bow. She now had everything. The original emails suggesting the scheme. The hidden spreadsheets from the server. And now, this, the same document, sent directly from Mark and Isabella's official company email, proving they were still actively trying to conceal the fraud. It was time to stop being a ghost. It was time to become justice. But she wouldn't be the one to pull the trigger publicly. That would look like the bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. No, she needed a more legitimate channel. She compiled a dossier. A digital file containing all the evidence, meticulously organized and annotated to tell the story of the fraud. She explained how Mark had deceived his early investors, how he had lied to secure millions, and how he and his new partner, Isabella, were now attempting to cover it up. And then, she sent it. Not to a newspaper. Not to the police. She sent it to the lead investor at the venture capital firm that was currently considering a $500 million investment in Omnitech's next round. She chose him because he was known for his ruthless integrity and his zero-tolerance policy for deception. The email was sent from a secure, anonymous account. The subject line was simple, urgent, concerning Omnitech's founding financials. She attached the dossier. And then she clicked send. There was no explosion. No dramatic scene. Just the silent, digital flight of an email that carried the weight of a destruction. Lena sat back in her chair. The war room was silent. For the first time in months, she felt calm. The plan was in motion. The wheels of consequence were now turning, and there was nothing Mark could do to stop them. The perfect payback was no longer hers to administer. It belonged to the cold, impartial world of finance and facts. And that world was about to come crashing down on him. They say revenge is a circle. That by hurting the one who hurt you, you simply continue the cycle of pain. But what Lena had set in motion wasn't just revenge. It was accountability. And sometimes, accountability is the only thing that can break the cycle. The fallout was swift and brutal. It did not happen on the front page of the newspaper, but in the hushed, panicked boardrooms of Silicon Valley. The lead investor, a man named Mr. Sterling, received the dossier. He was a legend, a man who valued honesty above all else. He had his team of forensic accountants descend on Omniteca's books within hours. They found the discrepancies immediately. The web Lena had woven was airtight. Mr. Sterling called an emergency board meeting. He presented the evidence. Mark, arrogant to the last, tried to bluff, to explain it away as a simple accounting error from years ago. But the evidence was too strong. The emails, the spreadsheets, the document he himself had sent to Sarah Jones. It was a noose he had tied himself. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO, effective immediately. The $500 million funding round was cancelled. The company's valuation plummeted. The IPO was dead. But it got worse. The early investors, the ones who had been defrauded, filed a massive lawsuit. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation. Mark wasn't just losing his job, he was facing financial ruin and potential prison time. And Isabella? The moment the storm hit, she vanished. She gave a statement to the press, claiming she was shocked and appalled by Mark's actions, that she had been duped by a charismatic liar. She saved her own skin by throwing him under the bus. The power couple was revealed to be a house of cards, blown over by the first strong wind. Lena watched it all from a distance. She saw the news break on a tech blog. She saw Mark's photo, once triumphant, now accompanied by words like disgraced and fraud. She felt no joy. No triumphant glee. Just a quiet, profound sense of closure. The final scene of his downfall was a public one. He was photographed leaving the Omnitech offices for the last time, carrying a single cardboard box, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. The man who had everything, the power, the money, the new woman, had been utterly, completely exposed. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own lies. Lena's payback was perfect not because it was cruel, but because it was just. She hadn't lied. She hadn't schemed for personal gain. She had simply gathered the truth and set it free. And the truth, as it so often does, had done all the work for her. Time has a way of healing, of softening the sharp edges of memory. A year later, Lena's life was unrecognizable, but in the best way possible. She had sold the cold, minimalist house. It was never a home, only a symbol. She used her share of the money to buy a smaller, brighter place, with a sun-drenched room that was all her own. Her studio. On the walls were new paintings. They were bolder, more complex than her old work. They held pain, but also strength. They told a story of survival. Her relationship with Chloe was deeper, more honest. She was no longer just a caretaker, she was a role model. She had shown her daughter that even when you are broken, you can pick up the pieces and build something new, something stronger. One day, a letter arrived from Mark's lawyer. He was accepting a plea deal. He would serve time. He had lost everything. There was no gloating in Lena's heart. Only a quiet pity for the man who had chosen a path of lies and lost himself along the way. She sometimes thought about that day with Chloe, about the caterpillar. The caterpillar does have to dissolve. Its old self, its old world, has to completely break down. It's a dark, scary process. It feels like the end. But it isn't. It's a transformation. It's the necessary chaos before you can grow wings. Mark's betrayal was the dissolution. Her revenge was not the wings, the revenge was the courage to believe she could grow them. The wings were the life she built afterward. A life of truth, of art, of authenticity. A life where she was no longer living in someone else's painting, but was the artist of her own destiny. He left her for another woman, thinking he was trading up for a shinier, more exciting life. But in doing so, he forced her to find a strength she never knew she had. He thought he was destroying her. Instead, he set her free. And in the end, her perfect payback wasn't his ruin. It was her rebirth. The butterfly had emerged, and she was finally, beautifully, flying.